This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. Bill Bartholomew here with you, as always, on Tuesday and Thursday for new episodes, plus whenever breaking news happens, and now on Saturday afternoons at 3 o'clock on WPRO. So a major issue when we talk about whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or just in general, the scope of vulnerabilities for our government, for businesses, and for individuals lies in the cybersecurity sector. Now, this is something that we've seen congressional action on. Of course, Congressman Langevin has been in many ways at the forefront of this. But broadly speaking, it's very nuanced. It's one of those things that even on a micro level is worth elevating and worth a conversation. So I'm very pleased to welcome CLA's David Sun today to have that conversation and kind of flesh out where we are, where things stand, some best practices for individuals, for our state's government, municipal governments, businesses, so on and so forth. So welcoming David onto the podcast for that conversation. Lots going on in Rhode Island right now. How about the Superman building conversation? And over the weekend, I put a couple of tweets up that really went nuclear here in Rhode Island and frankly even expanded onto other social media platforms. And as I fill in for Dan York this week on WPRO, I plan to discuss this as well. And the Superman building conversation, I just want to address this very quickly because we're going to have a lot more in-depth chatter about this and expertise on some of the options that are available. And it's something that undoubtedly will come up regularly as we examine campaigns and make our way towards the primaries in both the Providence mayoral race and at the state level on the gubernatorial race. Here's the thing. I put up this tweet. First of all, I put one up that was like, if you make the Superman building artist lofts, artist work live spaces, people would just move in there this afternoon, no renovation required. Obviously, I'm being a little bit facetious, but at the same time, it's probably kind of true. You know what I mean? That as is, yeah, there's obviously building code violations. It's likely to have asbestos. Egresses are a major issue. I get it. I'm not suggesting that this should happen, but the idea is sometimes when we think outside of the box and we don't go all in on a project in terms of maxing out the luxury dollars, sometimes there are solutions that are right there in front of us. In fact, there's a building in Cincinnati that's very similar to the Superman building that was renovated and rehabbed into apartments for apparently $75 million as opposed to the 200 and something plus million that the current Superman building project is slated to be priced at. And by the way, that's before any inflationary costs, any other increases based on labor availability, so on and so forth. So it's an expensive project. But the reality is, and aside from the artist loft conversation, which again, that was a sort of a hypothetical, facetious, sort of a ha-ha, type of approach to just looking at it from an outside of the box perspective. But let's be honest, folks, the Superman building, what they're trying to do is they want to get people who are 20 to 40 somethings who are part of the tech, meds and eds, or trust fund sector and bring new residents into downtown Providence. When you look at the price structure, even in the affordable component, quote unquote, which is like, if you're making $50,000, they're going to give you an apartment. And by the way, it's only 20% of these apartments that are affordable of the 285 apartments. They're going to still be around $1,200 a pop. So it's not exactly super affordable. Now, that's about 30-something% of income for someone who's making around $50,000. But the notion that this is intended for existing Providence residents by and large, or existing Rhode Islanders or regional residents who might, want to say, hey, let me try living in downtown Providence and get out of the suburbs, whatever it is. That's ridiculous. The idea is clearly a broad reinvention of downtown Providence, something that I think is fair to call the new Providence. And that's a term that Mayor Alorza has used from time to time, and I think he means it more in the conversation of reputationally and just in general being something that is, elevates the city for everybody. But I'm using it in the conversation of what they want to do with the I-95 land, what they want to do downtown, is not so much for the average resident of Providence. It's more targeting to try to build something that is kind of reminiscent of what's happening in Brooklyn, in Austin, in Nashville, and other municipalities around the country. And again, it's that tech sector, meds and eds, and I think trust fund people. Now, there's nothing wrong with those sectors. In fact, it's great to have an infusion of people who are making six figures living in downtown Providence. I mean, that would actually work really well in a lot of ways. Where the problem is when it becomes at the expense of everybody else, what I'm calling the old Providence. And you've got to find a way, if you're city, if you're state leadership, frankly, even if you're the developer to a certain extent, you've got to find a way to be able to bridge both the new and the old Providence. Now, how do you do that? It's a combination of things. Of course, there's a transit aspect. There's obviously a housing aspect in terms of developing properties throughout the city. There's a lot of abandoned properties. There's a lot of things you can do mechanically in terms of affordable housing, okay, that are not being done right now. And it's supporting small businesses, micro entities, the arts, all of those things. You have to be able to infuse dollars into the old Providence at the same time as you're developing the new Providence. You can't just steamroll over the Providence that's there right now. Now, everybody who is a naysayer is going to say, well, the schools are terrible. You know, somebody's going to mug you if you go to Providence. I never go to Providence. The place sucks, whatever it is. So those naysayers, you got to discount them as well. But you got to look to the people who actually live here or actually do business here and find ways to elevate them concurrently with building out this new Providence concept. If you have that kind of intermingling downtown and in the 195 district and throughout the city as a whole, then you actually have something going where, though the Superman building itself may not be the platform for, you know, residents who are seeking affordable or more affordable housing to move into, you at least can bridge and create a harmonic relationship with those two different versions of the city, the old and the new Providence. So I think that's something that we're going to keep front and center, and there's a lot of specific questions we want to answer, and it's something we'll continue to do here on the podcast. All right, but for today, David Sun, CLA, talking cybersecurity, a major issue for all of us to pay attention to here on Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town. As I alluded to in the open, cybersecurity and that broad landscape, I mean, it is a top shelf concern for individuals, businesses, governments, both federal, state, municipal, you name it. It's a major issue right now. And we see a lot of conversation around this with Russia, Ukraine. We see a lot of conversation around this in terms of just phishing scams and hacking and so on and so forth. And it's an area that is rapidly expanding. So we're very pleased to have David Sun, a principal at CLA, on here. We're taping in the morning and it's released in the morning. So whenever you're listening, we have David Sun here with us today. So I guess before we get into some of the best practices for preventing or responding to cyber attacks, if you can just kind of provide an overview of the cybersecurity landscape and what are companies and individuals, what is the greatest risk that they are facing today in this space?
Wow. So, that's a pretty loaded question. There's a lot going on
Yep.
in the cyber industry and cybersecurity landscape. It's bad out there, right? It's bad. The hackers are out there. They're doing stuff. They're really good. They're not the teenage, 14-year-old in Norway who's got nothing to do after school before mom and dad gets home. I mean, these are organized criminals, organized crime, nation state sponsored in some instances. 10 years ago, cyber attacks were nation states, but only after national secrets, right? So governments hacking governments. And as a regular citizen, we really didn't hear about it much. Only time we heard about cyber attacks were when the other component of cyber attackers back then, the anarchists, who would, disrupt websites, vandalize websites, disrupt business operations with denial of service attacks. But I mean, it was like kind of silly stuff, right? But now with the invention of cryptocurrency, it's basically allowed cyber attacks to become a profit-making venture, right? And now cyber attacks are business ventures. They're business ventures done by organized crimes, as I said, as well as nation states some of whom are doing it, whether it's to get national secrets and make a few bucks at the same time, or some are just doing it just to make a few bucks because they have a cash problem, right? They're sanctioned organizations. You have companies out there that are under sanctions from the U.S. And again, this is for years that's been going on, and this is a way for them to avoid sanctions. And that's part of why when this Ukraine and Russia action occurred, that most of us feel like that's going to be an impetus for greater attacks from Russia, since they've been doing it anyways, right? For Russian interests to attack and circumvent those sanctions that are out there.
Right.
So again, it's just getting worse. And then on the other side, you have businesses and organizations when they've been attacked, they're not doing enough about it, right? Whether it's proactive or even reactive. We've seen, first of all, businesses don't want to spend money on cybersecurity because it's a negative impact to their bottom line. It's like insurance or anything else. It doesn't increase your profits for a corporation, doesn't increase the revenue. It's just a drain on funds and resources. And so some organizations try to do as little as possible to get by, and then they get attacked, right? And then after the attack, they're not doing enough to make sure the impacted individuals, the people like you and I who've had our social security numbers stolen, or who've had our credit card numbers stolen, or things like that. And historically speaking, they haven't been doing enough to notify citizens. And then people are out there using our identities and using our credit cards, and we don't know about it until all sorts of damage and havoc has been done to our personal lives. And we had no idea this is something that might happen. And so a lot of regulators came in and they started putting in these laws. And there's actually a lot of laws out there right now that tell businesses and organizations, not just business, but all organizations, things that they depending on what industry or what they do, there's laws that tell organizations what they have to do proactively to protect against cyber attacks. We've seen this for a while in the healthcare industry with something called HIPAA. And HIPAA is more than just that form you fill out every time you see a new doctor that allows them to look at your records and exchange records. There's a lot of other stuff behind the scenes, and one of them is cybersecurity. So for medical organizations, they're supposed to do a certain amount, but it's a lot for cybersecurity. Not all do, but there's regulations out there that tell certain businesses that they have to do certain things in advance, and then there's regulations out there that tell all businesses that they have to do certain things after an attack occurs. So every state in the U.S., all 50 states, as well as some territories, Puerto Rico and others, they have laws that say if your company or organization has a cyber attack and certain type of data is involved, you must report it to certain entities, whether it's individuals, the state attorney general, or anything like that. There's laws out there, and there are lots of businesses who don't know those laws exist. And so they break the law unknowingly, and later on they find themselves in the crosshair of the local attorney general, and they get fined millions of dollars for not complying with the law that they didn't even realize existed.
Do you get the sense from your vantage point that, and I know this is somewhat anecdotal, but that businesses understand the gravity of the situation, or is there work to be done on an educational and informational side?
I think there are some organizations, some industries, especially those industries where there are proactive laws in place. I think those leaders and owners in those businesses have at least a little bit better understanding. I'm not a big regulatory type of person, but I am seeing the benefits of this. When you tell somebody, an organization, hey, if you want to do business in this state, if you want to do business in this industry, you must do certain things. Otherwise, they'll shut you down. Right. It makes leaders and owners pay attention and do something about it. They may do the absolute least possible that's allowable, right, and to get by, but at least it's something. And so I am seeing some awareness in those industries. In the industries that are not regulated or don't have the proactive cybersecurity stuff, I don't see a whole lot there. I mean, it's unfortunate, right? What I see is a lot of awareness and concern based on the golf course effect. That's two CEOs playing golf on the golf course. One CEO got hit with a cyber attack and all the headaches and told the other CEO about it. Now the other CEO starts to care, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, otherwise they kind of feel like it's not going to happen to them. It's not worth it. Why do they have to deal with it? That whole thing. And so I still see a lot of organizations that where ownership and leadership isn't getting it until it's too late.
Yeah, and definitely not something that you want to find out the hard way, even on a personal level. There's no question about it. Speaking to Russia, Ukraine, which has sort of thrusted this into a more mainstream general conversation. I had a conversation, I guess it was about a month ago now, maybe a little more even, with somebody in New York that was talking about a kind of a series of threats that could represent sort of the new war tactics that we'll be engaged with. Shutting down sewer systems and ransom attacks that involve literally just fundamental services that are, at this point, we mostly take for granted, but could really grind us to a halt. We're in a shields up moment right now here with Russia, Ukraine. Explain what that means. And then just broadly speaking, your assessment of what we're learning from this moment, this conflict that may, quite frankly, not end anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, the shields up concept is just to get everybody to understand that something might be coming at us at any moment in time, and to be ready for it and to do whatever we can to protect ourselves. At CLA, we're working with clients to practice their incident response plans, to do these exercises, these simulations that are pretty straightforward, pretty simple, not that expensive or involved. It's not like a huge issue. It's not like a huge ordeal, but half a day working through simulations, what we call incident response tabletop exercises, and we'll just pretend as if as if an organization is being attacked, and you say, okay, what are people doing? And you run through it, and there's no actual business interruption or anything like that you risk. We're working with organizations to do things like that because they need to realize, everybody's starting to realize that you need to be ready, and ready isn't just, well, I have a document that somebody wrote 10 years ago that says, if I have a problem, this is what I need to do. This is cybersecurity. This is IT, right? Things change on an annual, if not more frequent basis. So it's important for organizations to be practicing these exercises, be looking at what their weaknesses are, be securing and shoring up those areas where there are weaknesses. Again, shields up, just like on Star Trek, right? Get ready for an attack. That's kind of the concept. And that's really what organizations need to be thinking about right now, because this thing that's going on, this conflict of Russia, Ukraine, I mean, it's just kind of what we think is going to be the next step. We've already, as you said, we've seen that the Russians are attacking the critical infrastructure over in Ukraine, shutting down sewers, shutting down, communication links, things like that. And we even had a nuisance attack at Bradley Airport, up in Connecticut, that was reportedly attributed to a pro-Russian organization. Right? They said when the support for Ukraine stops, the attacks on your soil, on your cyber systems will stop. Right? I mean, Again, it was a nuisance attack, and it was a tweet that claimed credit for it. I don't know if that's real or not, but that's the kind of stuff. That's just a perfect example of the kind of things that we need to be worried about here in the U.S. And when I say perfect, I mean that's an example, but something a lot more severe than a nuisance attack.
Sure.
Rhode Island and national politics, media, arts, and newsmakers. Bartholomew Town with Bill Bartholomew. Saturdays at 3 p.m. on News Talk 99.7 FM and AM 630 WPRO.
Now back to B-Town.
Specifically here in Rhode Island, there are plenty of companies doing business with Ukrainian companies and firms, broadly speaking. Talk about that vulnerability, and should those companies be doing anything extra right now? Yeah,
I mean, that's tough, right? I mean, you have people that you're working with that are fighting for their lives, for their country. At the same time, some of them are still trying to do work, right? I mean, I know people who they still attend conference calls in between. Who knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So they're still working because they got to make a living. And the problem is that if you're working with those Ukrainian resources, I mean, there are a lot of really talented IT resources in Ukraine, And if you're working with them and they're and if they have access to your system, for example, if they're logging in remotely from Ukraine to do things, to upload code, software they developed, or to maintain systems or things like that. I mean, you have to, as a U.S. based organization, you have to be really careful about what's happening now. And what I've told organizations is that if possible, what you should do is you should set up sort of what I call the staging area. And what I mean by that is instead of having those logins from the Ukraine go directly into your systems as they used to, what you might want to do is have a staging area that has maybe copies of your production systems or your whatever systems these people need to access. Have them in the staging area, and then they log into that instead, right? Sure. And if they're uploading newly written software, then have them upload it to that location. And then once it's done uploading, have one of your US based resources look at the changes that are being made in the software and just double check and make sure that it all makes sense and looks legit. And then maybe you take it from the staging area into production instead of letting that Ukrainian login do it directly, because you never know, it might not be that Ukrainian resource anymore. Hard to say these days.
Absolutely. Well, let's continue talking prevention, because the threat of data breaches or other cyber attacks, phishing scams, whatever it may be, it existed obviously well before this Russia-Ukraine conflict, and it's going to continue who knows what the metaverse is going to look like in this space. Let's not even go there necessarily right now. But generally speaking, let's talk about some best proactive measures, best practices that businesses can take to solidify their cybersecurity infrastructure and prevent attacks that are either coming from rogue bad actors, or even in some cases, as we just touched on, nation states.
Yeah, I mean, proactive measures. It might sound a little silly, but the thing you need to do is think about it. Think about your security before it becomes a problem. I mean, again, it sounds silly, but every day, with my incident response practice at CLA, I get calls from companies who are under attack, and they want help, and they have no plans, no processes, no procedures in place, and they're just like, what do I do, right? And it's important for organizations to start that conversation about cybersecurity, to sit down and say, okay, what's my most valuable resource, right? Period. As an organization, what is my most valuable resource? A vast majority of the time, people will realize when they think about what the most important resource is, it's going to be in some electronic form or another, right? You could be, the secret sauce for some food that you make, right? It might be a food manufacturer, secret recipe. Okay, great. Guess what? I bet you it's written down somewhere electronically on a file somewhere, right? So what people need to realize is that, first of all, identify your most important resources and identify what the IT and the cyber risk is to that resource. And again, the vast majority of the time, people will realize there is that connection there, and they need to be concerned. And then start having that conversation about developing a cybersecurity program. How do we get better, right? Identify the risks. How do you address the risks? How do you improve situations? And it becomes cyclical, right? It's not a one-time thing, and you don't have to start with this big behemoth of an endeavor or project. You can start small. Just start chipping away at it. If companies don't want to spend a lot, that's okay. Spend some, a reasonable amount. Spend some and get the process started. And what happens is it becomes kind of eye-opening. How exposed you might be, and you can. There's the old 80-20 rule, right? You can probably address 80% of your issues with 20% of the budget you need, right? And so if you get started, you get going, you start to recognize what you have, what issues you have, and you start chipping away at it. And eventually over time, you get better and you get better and you get better and you get, more secure. Right. And that's really what companies need to do, is they need to start thinking about it if they're not.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about cybersecurity insurance and what needs to be covered when businesses are shopping for plans, and what you talk about, that 20-80 model or 80-20, depending on how you look at it. How does that fit into that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, businesses really need cybersecurity insurance, and the reason is because cybersecurity insurance will cover a lot of the costs associated with the breach. Now, it may not cover the reputational damage. Hard to say if it'll cover the loss of business, right? I think some of that's a little hard to quantify. But what it will do is it will cover the cost of an expensive attorney to walk you through it, to make sure you're following the right laws, like we talked about earlier, that you need to follow if you have a breach. It will cover a group like ours, a CLA, to come in and do incident response, to help you do the forensics on this and help you figure out exactly, how they got in, but more importantly, what they did and what they touched and what they stole and what they have, how bad, sort of do that investigation to figure out what's going on. And they'll help cover, any damages, any payouts you need to make. And that includes ransomware. If you get the right cybersecurity insurance coverage, it will include payment for ransomware. And, we've all seen in the news, just the ransomware payment could be millions of dollars, right?
That's right.
And that's not the only cost. I mean, the ransomware payment is often, maybe half or so of what the true cost of what the true cost of the incident. And I'm just making up that statistic, but give everybody a sense that it's not even the majority of the cost, right? So as much as people hear about the ransom payments and what they might be if they choose to pay them, recognize there's a lot of costs outside of that actual ransomware payment. And a data breach, it's a longish term type of incident. Most organizations continue to deal with the legal, regulatory, and operational issues of a ransomware attack, a data breach, for a year or more after they get back up and running. Most people think that you make the payment or you restore from backups, and a couple of days later you're back to normal and everything's good. No, I mean, depending on what kind of incident it is, you're still dealing with some of the byproducts for a year or more after.
All right. And then lastly, I mean, no matter what you do, there's always the opportunity for things to go awry, especially in this sector, in this space. So take us through the playbook. What happens when you get hit? What does it look like from your perspective? And when a breach occurs, what happens? How do you respond?
Oh yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, I usually come in after a company's thrashed around for a day or so, and their IT department's been trying to get them back up and running, and the executive, CEO, the board of directors, they're all kind of starting to get at each other's throats because things aren't going the way they think it's going to go. So I kind of come into a war scene, so to speak, right? I mean, it's a little rough, but what I usually tell all organizations, even when I get that first phone call from them in the early hours of an attack, I tell them, look, stop, think, act, right? Just go with that approach, right? Stop what you're doing. Stop your systems in terms of if there's a ransomware attack. You might need to look at stopping your systems to prevent the ransomware from spreading, right? Think about determine what's been happening, what has happened, what's been happening, what's required to lock things down. Stop and determine, do you need to notify legal counsel, your insurance carrier, any authorities or anything like that? Stop any financial transactions that may be on their way out the door because they may not be legitimate, right? So make sure you don't allow any money to start heading out the back door while the factors are still in your environment, right? Wire transactions and things like that. And then a quick inventory at your disposal of sort of what help you have, what resources do you have, and again, that's oftentimes when we might get called in, right? And then think. Okay, so once you've stop the damage, stop the propagation, stop any financial transactions, things like that. Think about what you need to do. Assess the nature of the impact. What kind of attack is it? Is it ransomware? Is it a compromised email account with data being downloaded? What's going on? Get the full scope. And again, that's where like forensics would be coming in to help out to understand what's really going on. Think about, what you need to do to not compromise the forensic investigation. Again, I come into organizations where people have already overwritten systems by trying to restore the backup, or they've overwritten computers, and I kind of say, look, from a forensic standpoint, you kind of killed us here, right? we don't have any data to work with because you scrubbed it all, you deleted it all. So think about what you're doing and making sure that it's not going to compromise that forensic investigation that you're going to want to do. You're going to want to do the forensic investigation because you're going to want to quantify what happened. You want to know which customers had their data compromised, for example. You don't want to lose that information and then have to resort to notifying all customers that their data may have been compromised, when you may have the ability to quantify and say, hey, here's the 1,000 people I need to talk to and discuss this with. So again, that's the importance of a forensic investigation. It gets lost a lot of times. But also think about, if you're in an attack, think about what's the motivation. What's the motivation for the cyber attack? Is it just money? Is it trade secrets? Is it nation states secrets? Is it just reputational damage? Sort of think about what the motivation is, because that's going to help impact how you move forward. And then the acts part, so it comes at the end, right? After, and when I say at the end, I don't mean at the very end, but sort of at the end of this process, this initial triage process, right? That's when the act part starts. So when you start deploying lockdown and risk mitigation procedures, where you start communicating with the right people. Maybe you start communicating with your clients if needed. You communicate to the general market. That's when you start acting. A lot of people, especially when you got a CEO breathing down your neck, losing money every minute, it's an action-oriented type of environment where they want you to do something. And I get it, but unless you know what you're doing, unless you're experienced in this type of environment, the actions, if you don't stop and think about it first, the actions, are instinctual, and they may be the wrong instincts just because people don't have that background, doing this every day.
David Sun, he's with CLA. He's a principal there, talking cybersecurity. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.